Let's Chat About It is a thought-provoking podcast where your hosts Lenora Sneva and Max Brown engage in meaningful conversations with everyday individuals about the pivotal moments when they realized they were different.
All right, welcome back to Let's Chat About It. And today we have Jo on the line. I can't say her last name. When she comes on, she's gonna like nail it. So
Yep.
we'll just Jo. She's from my church.
I think it's Nivling Izauierdo.
There we go.
I tried.
You did good. Max, do you have a question of the week for us?
I do have a question of the week. Lenora, if you could only watch one sport for the rest of your life, what would you watch?
Are you seriously asking me this?
Why not? Why is wrong with my question?
Volleyball.
I figured because and part of it was I actually was having a conversation. I was my realtor and a friend of mine who we went golfing recently. His son is a sportscaster.
Oh, cool.
And does a lot of works for Georgia Southern University. And he was one of the things he said was college volleyball is like having a moment right now.
It is
he's getting a bunch of games requests to come in and do announcing for women's college volleyball. It's becoming a thing. And I'm like, I hadn't really watched a ton of it until.
So are you going to start in the fall? Because it's going to start up again in the fall.
I'll be watching.
Go.
And then we got like women's professional volleyball.
I know. We have I think there's 6 professional
leagues
now.
Or teams. There's and Atlanta's got one.
Yeah, Atlanta, Vegas. I can't remember all the. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And what's cool about it too is it's there's a lot of the star players from colleges, that are just graduated, and so they've got this following already, and so now they're doing pro, and it's pretty cool.
There you go.
All right, that's pretty cool. All right, let's bring on Jo. Let's bring her in and have her pronounce her name correctly for us. Hey everyone, so we have Jo here, and Jo, just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Gosh. Okay. My name is Jo Nivling Izauierdo.
And now we know why Lenora did not say her full name.
Exactly. It's actually Kristen Joelle Nivling Izauierdo, which is why it's just Jo. A lot easier. I was born and raised in Maryland and came out to the West Coast as soon as I could when I was 18 and have mostly stayed out here except for a stint in for my first graduate school. So I am married and I have no human kids, but many pets. They're mostly accidents. We didn't see them coming, but we took them in. They're all rescues, and a couple of them came when we weren't looking for a dog, but then they were rescues and they came to us and we took them in.
You have 7 dogs?
No, thank God. I have 4 dogs and 3 cats. It's still a lot of dogs.
Jo, just to let you know, our neighbors, not 9. So you got
9 dogs?
Yeah.
Do they bark?
They run a rescue.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
That was my husband's dream with his ex-wife, and I made it real clear early on, that is not my dream.
That's not my dream.
That's not my dream. Because you can never go on vacation, right? Leave the rescue. Who is going to take care of it?
The struggle is real.
It's expensive. Unless you've got a really good friend.
Right. I have a lot of really good friends, but I don't have friends good enough to, I dislike enough to make them house sit at my house. Let's just say that. I would never put anyone through that. I work as a clinical ethicist at hospitals and a Catholic hospital system that has both Catholic and non-Catholic hospitals in it.
What's a clinical?
Yeah.
Exactly.
What's a day in the life?
Okay. Yeah. Well, the way I explain it to patients when I meet them is to say when situations get kind of tricky or sticky and we're not sure what to do or people disagree on what to do, the doctors asked me to come in and help people think together to find a way forward. And so, that's a hopefully approachable way of saying that we help people solve ethical dilemmas, and not so much solve, because the cases that come to us don't have answers, right? Like that's why they've come to us. Every once in a while, something straightforward comes, and I'm like, oh, I'm so excited. I know this one, but that's usually, it shouldn't have gotten to us in the first place. Yeah. So, if there's a situation where a patient seems to want one thing, but their family member is saying, actually, we want this other thing. And the doctors are like, we don't know what to do because the family's saying, do this, do this, do this. The patient's like, no. Then we can come in and help people think together about the various moral, ethical frameworks at play and who has responsibilities and duties to whom, and where those things are getting kind of gridlocked, and how to move forward in a way that respects where people are coming from, but is also ethically permissible in a medical ethics setting.
Wow. Oh my goodness.
So a lot of words. Okay, there's a lot of words. Sorry.
So do you go into the patient's room to have this conversation? Oh, okay. Yeah. And is the doctor also there?
Yeah. So I try to talk to everybody involved separately to learn where they're coming from. And then if we need to meet together and have me facilitate a conversation together, then we can do that as well. And then sometimes we just find that there are really just two ethical frameworks at work. Like, I can think of an example of one where the doctor really firmly thought, this patient is not going to get better. The thing that we should do for this patient is to let them die peacefully, and felt as his duty to his patient, who he believed was suffering. He said, it's my duty to recommend this. And the family was saying, no, she's going to get better. And the doctor was like, no, she's not. I'm telling you that. And in talking to the family, it turned out that they were really driven by their duty to their loved one to fight for her, like they knew that she would fight for them, right? And the doctor didn't have a sense of that's what's going on here, and the moral drive here. It's not that they disagree with your knowledge. It's that they need to fight for this person. They know she would fight for them, and they're going to do that. It's like, that's where their value system is as a family. So,
wow.
Yeah.
You're like a medical coach, medical negotiator.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of, what do you call it? Like sort of mediation sometimes involved, but you can't just come to any old decision, right? Like, it has to be in what is ethically permissible, as we like to say in Western bioethics, essentially.
I'm curious about what you got as your undergrad, like your BA, and then your master's.
How does one become a clinical?
Right? I'm like, maybe my daughter should do this.
Yeah. You can come at it from a lot of different ways. I came at it. Well, my undergrad was in history because I
the typical, the normal route to
exactly. I wanted to just take as many classes in different things as I could, and the history major allowed me to do that. Lots of electives. So, and then I went straight to grad school, and at the time I thought I wanted to be like a theology professor. So I went to seminary and got a master's of divinity. Ended up learning that I did not love libraries as much as I thought, but I did love people. So I went from like wanting to be a professor to wanting to work in the church, or work as a minister, basically. So and then in the middle of my seminary degree, I did an internship in a hospital, which is something, I was a Presbyterian, and so something you have to do to become a Presbyterian pastor. And I loved it. It was mind-blowing. So I became a hospital chaplain, and I worked as a hospital chaplain for, basically officially up until last year. And so I was coming at it from a, theology, ethics, philosophy background, whereas some people come at it from a, medical, or there are lawyers, or there are social workers, or there are nurses, there are like kind of all kinds of different people who've had experience in the clinical setting were in my degree program, because it was like a professional degree. So I did another, so 10 years later after first grad school, I started a master's, and then that turned into a professional doctorate in bioethics. So my classmates were people who had all sorts of different backgrounds, but we were all coming together to work on this one profession, which was really interesting.
And where did your schools, you kind of mentioned Maryland, West Coast, it's not West Coast. Where did you all go to school? I'm just kind of curious.
Yeah. So I went to undergrad at Claremont McKenna College, which is a little liberal arts school in Southern California. And then back to the East Coast for seminary at Princeton Seminary, and then to San Francisco for chaplain training for a year, and then to Seattle for a job. And I haven't moved from the Puget Sound area since then. I lived in Seattle for a couple of years, and then moved down to the South Sound for a job, and have stayed here.
And PhD was from, just out of curiosity?
Professional doctorate. So it's not
okay.
PhDs are so cool, and I'm not one of them.
Okay, gotcha. You're like, do you respect the title?
I didn't write it,
Okay.
So yeah, it's from Loyola University Chicago.
Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah. Is that all of them? I think so.
Yeah, you did it. All the things. Tell us about a time when you knew you were different. What was happening for you?
Yeah. The first thing that comes to mind is, I think I was a senior in high school, and I moved to a new church that was in a different county, a much wealthier county than mine. And at this church, they had a really thriving youth group, and that's why my parents and I went there. And no, actually, this is 10th grade. It wasn't senior year, 10th grade. And I arrived at the youth group like before Sunday school, and everyone's mingling with their donuts. And I don't know, did we have coffee as high schoolers? Juice, maybe donuts and juice.
Yeah, probably coffee.
Yeah. And I'd never liked mingling, but I had never found it so difficult to join into a group of people. There was a group of people who to me looked like the people at my school. And, so I kind of tried to join the circle, like, hi. And it was pretty clear that I didn't belong in that circle. And it took me a few weeks to realize, like, I think it's a class thing, or it's I am not wearing the right clothes, or I should go back and try to find one of them and ask them, 30 years later, like, what was happening?
That's what Facebook's for. I mean,
20 years later. But realizing, like, in this context, like, my group is the outcast group, like all the other like awkward, weird kids. That's where I belong. Which turns out to be awesome, because the awkward, weird kids are the best. Like, there's no like having to put on.
No, you're just yourself.
Just yourself. Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
Did you ever? I mean, how did you stay at the church?
I did. Yeah.
What was that experience like? What happened?
Yeah, I never broke into the cool crowd. But I ended up.
You can be thankful for.
Yes.
Let's be real. Like 5 years later, you look back and you're like, thank God I never ended up in that group.
Yeah, I loved the youth group, and I loved what I learned, and I loved the faith, and I was super into it. So they had a college. When you're in college, you could work as a summer staff, like intern, with the youth group, and there was a big like, I don't know, 2,000, 3,000 member church, and they would have like 10 interns working with the 6th through 12th graders all summer. And you're kind of like their camp counselor, except it mostly wasn't at camp. And it was really fun. And I had the same group of girls for a couple of years, and got to see them go from being 8th graders, then 9th graders, and 10th graders. And And now I realize they're actually just 5 years younger than me. We're essentially the same age. But at the time, right? Like,
I was you're vastly more mature. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of curious then, you go from, I guess, how did that experience impact you as you went through history degree, but then kind of making this, when did you realize maybe I want to go to seminary?
Yeah.
And how those kind of all played together?
I think I knew I wanted to study theology. So not necessarily seminary, right? Because seminary is usually to train pastors, and I wanted a PhD, not like a master's of divinity, which pastors would be. But when I was applying to schools, I think I knew that from probably the end of high school, early college, like, because I was still really involved in that church. And when I got to grad school, it turns out that at Princeton, they really only had the Master's of Divinity degree as if you were going to get a PhD, that was the track you went on. So, and they had the best scholarship, and they were where a lot of people who were telling me, oh, you should go there, who I trusted.
And it's Princeton. I mean,
yeah. Can't go wrong.
Yeah. And so, yeah, and luckily I did that, because if I had just been straight academic, I would have, I think, burned out really fast, because I had a job in the seminary library, which was amazing. And it was in special collections. So super nerdy, like the coolest library stuff you could be doing. And I was bored out of my mind. And then I would do these internships that were required of me as part of the MDiv, even though I wasn't going to be a pastor. Then I did the pastor stuff and was like, oh, actually, I love this a lot more. This is my jam, you know? So.
That's so cool. Yeah. What about like when you were, I don't know, actually, I'm interested in you being a chapel pastor or minister. Yeah. Or chaplain, right? Yeah. So what was that like? Why did you like it so much? You did it for a while, right? Like 10, 15 years or yeah.
Yeah, like 12, 13-ish or something. I loved it. And yeah, I loved it. Probably I still do love it. What did I love about it? The memory that comes back to me my first day as an intern at a big hospital in New York City. And which I was from, we were talking yesterday about people being from small towns or in Eastern Washington or whatever. And I was from like that small town, but in Maryland. And so New York City was like so cool because everyone was there. And this hospital was really famous. And so people would, fly in from different countries to get transplants. And
Bellevue Hospital? Is that the one?
No, New York. Oh my gosh. New York Presbyterian Weill Cornell Medical Center. Okay. It might have a different name now. But it's close to, it's not far from Bellevue. It's, it's one of the really good hospitals in New York. And I know we had people from like Arab countries flying in to get liver transplants or whatever. Right. And then you have the people who like lived on the street down the block and just everyone in between. And so I would go from room to room, or in that case, from curtain to curtain in the same room. And I would just get to hear people's stories, and they blew my mind, right? Like, I think on my first day, I had one lady telling me about her near-death experience that happened like last week. Well, she was in surgery and almost died. Oh, wow. And then I had a woman who had attempted suicide, and next to her was a woman around the same age who had just been diagnosed with a metastatic breast cancer. And then like the two of them are, the woman with the cancer is like, I can't believe, like I'm losing my life. And you would like, it was wild.
Yeah.
It was wild. And a lot of being a hospital chaplain is learning to make that space where people can tell their stories or talk things out and be heard. Right. And I loved that.
Yeah. That's so cool.
Yeah. I mean, there was that piece of it. There was like really making a difference in like the worst moments of people's lives, being able to come alongside them and, if nothing else, be a witness, but also, hopefully making this horrible situation like just a smidge less horrible than it would have been if I wasn't there. So we would get called to, and like code blues, right, when people are being resuscitated, or a lot of deaths, and then just everything in between.
And Joe, that's what I was I assumed as a chaplain, you probably are dealing with a lot of end of life circumstances.
Yeah.
Which I gotta imagine is just like, that's a tough job. Like emotionally, I feel like that would be a tough job. What was your experience with that? How did you manage that?
It was fine until COVID. But so I'd say before that,
what was different about it? What made COVID different?
Right. It's a great question, because I think people assume it was like, oh, the volume of death. But like, I had, had multiple deaths a day sometimes for a long time. I think I counted it up, and like in my mid-30s, I'd probably seen 1,000 people die, like literally seen them, right, in a hospital. So it's not as
it's not like you're out walking the street and all of a sudden something random occurs.
Right.
It's kind of part of the job.
Yeah. But during COVID, we had these rules about people not being able to visit. And it actually might be hard for me to talk about, because I have had, let's say, PTSD from it.
Okay. If we don't want to talk about it, you don't need to.
Yeah, let's not.
No, it's okay. I do, because that was the hardest part for me. Was there would be situations in which I was allowed to be there, but the family wasn't, and that seemed so wrong to me. Because I'd been at a lot of people's deathbeds and been with their families, who are there with them as they're dying, and like seeing how important this is. And their loved ones would be on an iPad, and I'd be holding the iPad up, so like hopefully the patient can hear it. And they're like, "Can she hear us?" And I mean, to be honest, like, she's on a huge mask that's making lots of air noises, and she's in a room where we've just cut a hole in the wall so that we could ventilate it correctly for COVID. She is not hearing you. But of course I'm saying yes, like, yeah, I can. I'm putting it right up to her. Like, she can hear you spiritually, like, hopefully.
Yeah, exactly.
So it was the iPad ones. And then also the worst ones were they would allow people into the ICU, but not into the room. So people would be at the door with their hands on the glass, right? Like so close, but not actually able to touch the person. And I would be in there being the one like stroking their hair or like holding their hand. After asking the family if that, what kind of thing would be comforting to her. It's just like, this is so wrong, this shouldn't be me. This should be them. And it made me curious. So, yeah.
Yeah. Can I just take I just want to say thank you. I mean, I can't imagine doing that job. And I'm sure, knowing the limitations that family members experienced, having somebody there who could be that presence in the hands and feet next to a loved one. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it felt, of course, very meaningful, and it felt really important, and it made me so mad. And it got to the point where like I couldn't do the job because I would be crying or super angry, or like my emotions are out of control. And luckily my job was super supportive and I got great treatment, but and luckily I was already in school for bioethics, and we weren't paying anyone to do that, but the plan was we would eventually. And so I hung in there for a few years and was very, very lucky, fortunate to actually get the job and not have to leave the organization, and have a really supportive organization through that. So
it is nice.
Yeah.
Well, Joe, we're kind of at the end of our discussion, and we always ask that question about, is there something that you might say to your younger self? I know you talked about being a sophomore and kind of being in the out crowd. I don't know if there's something you want to say to her, that younger one, or at another stage in your life. What would you want to say?
I think I would say get therapy earlier, to be honest. Yeah. I was diagnosed with a depression as a first year in graduate school, when it had really started as a junior in college. But I thought it was a spiritual thing and it had nothing to do with mental illness. And like, that was the world I was from. but it did, and would have been really great if I had known that and gotten that support early. So that's, I think, maybe what I would have said to myself and all my friends at the time is,
right.
Yeah.
Get some help.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Joe, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your story and all the work that you've done, especially during COVID. I thank you for sharing that story. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for giving me the opportunity.
Yeah. All right. Take care.
Okay, bye.
Bye. That was Joe. Another great guest. Again, I think we talked to 4 people from my church, and we're taking some time on Tuesdays to look back at the videos, and she's just a part of that group. Yeah. So that was really nice to meet her and hear her story. I don't know her very well, and now I feel like I do. And wow.
You can learn a lot about somebody in 25 minutes.
Yeah, you can. It doesn't take very long at all, does it?
No. That's pretty incredible. I think a couple of these stories in my mind, you realize there are people, previously we had on, was it Craig earlier?
Yeah, we had Craig and Malcolm and Lee.
But I think about Craig's story in particular, and I'm like, dude was a scientist in the dirt. That's a special kind of person.
That's a very special niche.
I'm not doing that. Or I think even for tonight, listening to Joe's story is, I don't know if I could sit and hold someone's hand while they died. In my mind, I'm like, I don't think I have never actually witnessed. I mean, I've been very fortunate that death has not really brushed through me very closely.
Yeah.
But to hear thousands of people, how that's just it. I'm thankful that there are people out there in the world who have the gifts and the skills and the abilities and the passion to do the things that are that important on all sides of this, or on all sides of the spectrum.
Yeah. I watched my mom die, and I got to hold her hand, but it's harder when it's, your own too. It's nothing that I would wish on anybody, but Joe is an amazing person. I loved her story. It's pretty inspirational.
Yes.
All right, everybody. Yeah, of course. And that's the end of the people from my church. But I know we've got some newer guests coming on from Max has a friend coming on soon, and we've got some more friends coming on. So we will see you all next week.
Bye, everybody.